Hello everyone, my name's Matthew Griffin. I'm the founder and CEO of the 311 Institute and the World Futures Forum. And we're a deep futures think tank. We look up to 50 years out. So we kind of look at two futures. We look at the near future, which we regard as the next 20 years, and we look at the deep futures. So those are typically futures between 20 to 50 years out. Now, if you're a multinational, typically you care more about the near-term future, so the 5, 10, 20-year view. If you're a sovereign government, though, basically you can care about basically the next 50 years because inevitably you're trying to plan for it. So particularly when we have a look at the future of jobs, education, skills, the welfare state, energy, infrastructure, transportation, all these kinds of things. But today what I want to talk to you about basically is what I call the Great Reinvention. Now, over the past 18 months, we've seen a huge amount of turbulence basically throughout the world, obviously caused by the global pandemic. And there are lots of different names for post-COVID. So we have, for example, the Great Reset. We have Build Back Better. We have the Recovery. And we have all kinds of other taglines as well, including the famous New Normal. But I think that we actually now have an opportunity to reinvent not just the world, but also ourselves, basically within a new image. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today. So consider this. As humans, basically, we are the most complex organisms in the universe. And in the past 18 months, we have been humbled and taken to our knees, arguably, by the universe's most simple form of life. In fact, it's so simple that the vast majority of biologists don't even consider viruses as alive or as life. And yet, here we are. And yet, when you have a look at the impact, basically, of this tiny organism, shall we say, this virus, basically, on global society, it has been absolutely total. So when you have a look at any trend, whether it is a mega trend, whether it is a micro trend, irrespective of what spectrum you're looking at, it's had a dramatic impact. Now, for example, in the social sphere, we've had over 3.5 billion people in lockdown. When we have a look at the working population, it's estimated that the general working population has lost over $3.7 trillion in wages. When we have a look at the economic situation, basically we have seen lots and lots of different countries being pushed to pre-World War II recessionary levels. And that's before we start talking about the amount of money basically that's being pumped to try to support economies. When we have a look at the environment, though, the environment has significantly benefited from COVID, man and humanity's withdrawal basically from the world. And again, when you have a look at a lot of the sort of the post-COVID recovery plans, this is partly why they're all green and sustainable, because we know the impact that we've been having on the planet as a whole. When we have a look at politics, basically we have everything from vaccine nationalism, basically we have trade wars, we've had all kinds of different things basically going on. And then as we sort of come back basically to the radar, one of the other winners is technology. And if you consider this, everything is speeding up. Traditionally, it would have taken us about 10 years to create a vaccine for COVID. It took us 8 months. In fact, most of that time was taken up with human trials. Now, when you consider the impact basically of supercomputers, genomics, gene editing technologies, artificial intelligence, if it wasn't for some of these technologies today, we would be in a much worse situation and we'd all be in lockdown still, arguably. But we're not going to get into those debates today. Now, if you're like me, you're probably fed up of wearing a mask. Now, just as a little sort of point of interest, basically we have new technologies coming through. There is a bio-optical sensor that if it comes into contact basically with COVID, it'll make your mask glow. So, how do you know that you haven't been infected by COVID already or exposed to COVID? You can thank sensors basically for that. Albeit that those are brand new and they've actually come through rather too late basically to help the majority of us and the world at large. We're all fed up of having things shoved up our noses. I mean, I've lost count basically of the number of times basically someone has done this to me, and frankly, it's unpleasant. We are all probably fed up of binging on Netflix. In fact, Netflix's stock actually declined basically as people started coming out of lockdown because the subscriber count started to dip. So this kind of leaves us with this sort of big question. As we start seeing rays of sunshine again, literally and figuratively, as the vaccine rollout continues at a good pace, as lockdowns basically around the world to varying degrees basically start, being dismantled, what's next? And there's loads and loads of people who will tell you what you should do next as an organization or as a leader. This is my response. I think you should focus on you.
What do you feel when you say the word I?
Make a choice. Like, you just decide what it's going to be, who you're going to be, how you're going to do it. Just decide. And then from that point, the universe is going to get out your way. It's like it's water. It wants to move and go around stuff,
If you decide to drop your buckets where you are and develop your gifts, I grant you, you'll never ever be without. I grant you that your gifts will take you places that will literally amaze you. So decide that you're going to take some time to work on you, that you deserve that from yourself, that your life deserves some prime time because you are creating your own production. You are the star of your show. You are the director. You're writing the script. And you will determine whether your life is a smash office hit or flop.
I'm going to work. I'm going to press forward. I'm going to learn. I'm going to do everything in my power. Every single day, I'm going to do everything in my power to become a victor and not a victim. Winners win and losers lose.
It's better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than to have an opportunity and not be prepared.
We have all lost so much. We have all experienced so much. The first thing that you should start doing as we see those rays of light basically is actually focus on you. Get yourself better. Get the help that you need if you need any. Help others. And then from an organizational perspective, give people time off. That's my first piece of advice, and I hope you listen. It's absolutely important. However, as you're taking the time basically to sort of rediscover your purpose and your organization's purpose and think what you are actually going to do with your lives basically in the future, it's absolutely vital that you build back in a resilient way. You be prepared, because basically what you are preparing yourself for, you've never seen it before. And I'm going to be showing you those things. So when we have a look basically at our next generation products and services, basically when we do start building back, when we do start approaching the Great Reset and all these other sort of monikers basically that we hear about, there are over 450 exponential technologies that we can combine together to create the future. This is my starburst. There are 180 exponential technologies on here. Every single one of these technologies can change either one industry or every single corner of society. Every single dot is worth $500 billion from an addressable market opportunity, and the radar goes from about 2021 to 2071, a 50-year view. And artificial intelligence, for example, basically is just one dot. There is the opportunity to build back the future in a way that you have never ever conceived of before. And whether it is 3D printing, which disrupts the $10 trillion manufacturing industry, which we actually used during the coronavirus pandemic to help rebuild ventilators in Italy at speed and scale. Whether it is new computing paradigms, whether it is 5G, basically, whether it is 6G, basically in 10 years' time, whether it is new energy systems that are coming through. We're going to be having a little bit of a chat through that. I'm not going through this starburst basically in detail because we've got limited time. But when we have a look at future computing paradigms, we've got quantum computers coming through that are 100 million times faster. They will crunch 2.5 billion years worth of calculations in minutes, something called quantum supremacy. So as and when the next pandemic rolls around, it's not going to take 18 months to create the next vaccine. We'll be able to do it in a day. And there's a whole conversation about that. When we start having a look at things like robotics, basically we have hard robotics, soft robotics, we have software-based robotics, and we're not just talking about things like RPA. You know, when we start looking at artificial intelligence, we've been able to 3D print AI. We've been able to create artificial intelligences out of DNA. And that's before we get anywhere close, basically, to talking about artificial narrow intelligence, general intelligence, super intelligence, which are all due either here now or over the next sort of 20 years. And when we start having a look at things like security, we've got Morpheus computer platforms coming through, self-configuring computers that so far 300 expert hackers have not been able to break into, despite being given all the access they need. And then, of course, when we have a look at the user experience, so we have AR, MR, virtual reality, we've got neural interfaces coming through, basically, which have a great impact in healthcare, as well as massive impacts basically for the future of interfaces. There's all kinds of stuff. And you can download this codex for free. It's on the website. Just follow the link. Now, when we start having a look at the future, I'm going to be showing you the things basically that everybody else doesn't show you. I'm going to basically be going under the surface. I'm going to show you the base of the iceberg. And what I'm showing you, though, is just a tiny, tiny sliver of that iceberg. So let's start talking about how we accelerate basically when we get back to the Great Reinvention. Firstly, we're already seeing what I call creative machines coming through. So creative machines are artificial intelligences that are creative. They are able to design and innovate products at speed. And when we talk about at speed, how would you like me to show you how you can accelerate your rates of innovation tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold, 1,000,000-fold, 1,000,000,000-fold? We can do that, and I've got examples. I'm a show and tell kind of guy. So today, these creative machines, which are there's a whole variety of different ways you can actually create them. From an innovation perspective, they're at the iterative stage. You can kind of give them a product, or they can take a product and they can very rapidly iterate that product to be generation 2, generation 3, generation 4, based on whatever your requirements are. But as we see dramatic increases in artificial intelligence capabilities, computing power, as we start seeing improvements basically in virtual reality worlds, so these are sort of simulations, this is where you really start getting to some extreme speeds. So for example, OpenAI crammed 800 years worth of training into just a couple of days to create the world's most dexterous robot hand that can solve a Rubik's Cube in a minute. But it is so dexterous that actually it has major implications basically for everything from robosurgeons all the way through to warehouse workers and fulfillment centers, who in some cases basically will be jobless because of it. When we have a look at materials and 3D printing, for example, basically we can not only use these machines to create and design brand new products at extreme speed, we can then print those products off on demand. So let's give you some examples. So Airbus basically is using creative artificial intelligences to help them design the A330neo. InSilico used artificial intelligences to help them design over 30,000 drugs in 21 days. Toyota used a creative artificial intelligence to design a completely new type of electric vehicle battery and test it in 16 days. Normally that takes 2 years. NASA are using these machines to design future lunar rovers that are 30% lighter than anything that the experts at JPL can put together. And then Under Armour used an artificial intelligence to design a new sneaker, day 1. That sneaker can be 3D printed off, day 2. And in Under Armour's case, they normally take about 18 months to go from concept to shelf. They've collapsed that down by 99%. So when we start talking about the speed of change, creative machines that can design and innovate, and then 3D printers which can manufacture these products on demand and personalize them if you want, are already here, but they accelerate the rate of change like you'd never believe. This is your new competition. We have General Motors using these to design new cars. If you don't know about creative machines, go and have a look. I strongly encourage you to go and have a play around with them and speak to people about them. In addition to that, though, when we have a look at stuff that's made by machines as well, we've got synthetic content. We have artificial intelligence that's producing music. And we've got Sony and Warner Brothers, basically, who are actually signing up virtual artists. We've got other companies, basically like OpenAI, basically whose artificial intelligences are producing procedural video games. NVIDIA, whose AIs are producing video games. We've even got AIs that are writing books. So when we look at synthetic media and synthetic content, we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail later on. Yeah, there's a whole world of new things, new trinkets and toys, basically, that you can go and actually look at. Even when it comes down to corporate communications, you want to reduce the cost of your corporate communications by 99%, have a look at some of the digital humans. So anyway, I talked about reinventing. Now, I know that in the audience, basically, there are a lot of different people from lots of different backgrounds, lots of different industries. So all of these industries are connected. I'm going to show you just some highlights, basically, of how these industries are being disruptive, or being disruptive and being disrupted. So firstly, automotive. Bearing in mind that we don't have much time, I'm going to get to the point. Now, if I take, we all know that the future of the car is fully autonomous and electric. But if I take the dashboard, the pedals, and the steering wheel out of a car, I no longer have a car. So we're already seeing the death of the car. I have a pod. This isn't lost on companies like Audi and Toyota, who are already moving to a post-car era. But if I have a pod, an empty space, I can kind of do all sorts of things. I can turn it into an autonomous shop, an autonomous surgery. I can turn it into an autonomous delivery vehicle, an autonomous commuting vehicle. Or, as Aprilia over in the US are trying to do, I can turn it into an autonomous hotel room. You know, when we start talking about human ingenuity is actually helping us get out of COVID faster than ever before. But it's this unison of technology and human ingenuity that's really basically sort of, sparking some good stuff. In addition to that, now when we go and have a look at electric vehicles, basically you go and have a look at your Teslas, they've got lithium-ion batteries in them. Lithium-ion batteries, basically in 2035, we're going to have a huge glut of lithium-ion batteries that need recycling. There's a whole industry there that companies like Volkswagen, basically, and Mercedes are sort of trying to get a lead on. But this is the Terzo Millennio from Lamborghini. There's no lithium-ion batteries in it. Now, in the future, we can wirelessly charge vehicles. We can create vehicles that are powered by the sun. So we have Lightyear One, we've got Hyundai, and we've got Toyota, who've already got commercial solar cars now. But this one's interesting because actually the shell of the car is the battery. It's called a structured battery, where the carbon fiber, for example, is the battery. So when we think about the future of the electric vehicle industry, it's not necessarily what you think. Communications. Now, when we have a look at communications, we are throwing up thousands of nanosats basically into low Earth orbit and geo. And from a business perspective, if you're not in the communications industry, why do you care? I'll tell you why you should care. Because over the next 10 years, this is going to double your addressable market opportunity, because these systems are going to be used to connect the other 3.5 to 4 billion people on the planet who have no decent internet connections today. So if you're a digital business, how do you plan on leveraging this single technology that will make a difference to the entire planet? In addition to that, when we start having a look at energy, we've got all kinds of different energy systems coming through. We already have over 1 trillion watts of renewable energy installed, bearing in mind the world consumes about 6 trillion watts basically of electricity and energy. So we're starting to leave fossil fuels behind, which is why certain Middle Eastern economies are now starting to try to diversify themselves. But in addition to that, basically we've got polymer batteries coming through that will charge your electric car within 30 seconds to a full charge. We have 3D printed lithium-ion batteries that have a 400% greater energy density basically than traditional lithium-ion batteries. We've got bacteria-based and hybrid photovoltaic materials that increasingly you'll be able to spray on. But when you have a look at some of these flexible materials, this is where you can apply a flexible material, a flexible PV material basically to a car like a Tesla, and you can get rid of some of those lithium-ion batteries. In addition to that, basically we've actually got new nuclear reactors coming through, traveling wave reactors, all these kinds of things, that if there is a cataclysmic event, they just shut down. They don't have to keep the rods cool. So that's a sort of interesting design one. We have green hydrogen coming through, as well as grey and blue hydrogen, but fundamentally we're seeing an explosion basically in hydrogen-based activity. And then we have wireless electricity and wireless energy. At the moment, most of you will be using wireless energy to charge your toothbrush, basically, or your mobile phone, but increasingly we'll be able to charge your car as it travels along the highway, or as it travels behind a pontoon of semi-trucks using wireless charging. And when we start talking about wireless charging, we have peer-to-peer wireless charging. So the truck in front can charge your car as you're traveling behind a truck, and the truck will charge you for it. So we have a lot of new business models coming out when we have a look at the sort of energy sector. When we have a look at wireless energy transmission, we can now, thanks to MCOR, basically over in New Zealand, we can transmit megawatts of electricity long distances. So this means you no longer necessarily have to invest the same amount of money in electricity infrastructure. So think about overhead pylons, all those kinds of things. You can get to remote areas a lot cheaper basically than any time in the past. When it comes to solar panels. Solar panels, especially if you go and buy a solar panel from anyone today, typically it's a solar panel. It's a silicon solar panel. It's about 17% energy efficient. Over in the US Department of Energy, we've got solar panels and concentrators that are 48% efficient. A Perscovite solar panel is about 32% energy efficient. A bacterial solar panel, which is literally as it sounds, we use gene editing basically to modify bacteria, is up to 50% energy efficient. If you put carbon nanotubes into a traditional silicon solar panel, it gathers the heat together, and you now have a panel that is 80% energy efficient. And if you use black silicon, you have a solar panel basically that has a pathway to being 132% energy efficient, which is possible. For every single photon that hits the solar panel, it generates 1.3 electrons. So you can get over 100% energy efficient solar panels, and these are already either in the labs and or prototyped. So imagine what that does for the cost of electricity. It drops it to zero, bearing in mind that we're already at about 0.2 kilowatt hours. When we start combining some of these different technologies, if you put graphene onto a traditional silicon solar panel, you can generate electricity from snow, from rain as it dribbles over the surface. If you use bacteria, then you can generate electricity even when it's cloudy. And if you use nanophotonic materials, then you can even create solar panels that generate electricity at night. So that has an impact. All of these have an impact basically for grid scale storage initiatives. And as for nuclear, well, this is actually a video basically of the US Department of Energy 3D printing a mini nuclear reactor in their lab, complete with nuclear core. This fundamentally changes how nuclear is regulated. It also changes the economics of nuclear. And that's another story. Now, from a finance perspective, we've obviously got Bank 4.0, basically we've got fintechs. We've also got decentralized finance. So this is where, for example, I can just cut out the banks and I could lend you money and you could pay me directly. And I can charge you a particular rate of interest. And there's all sorts of interesting sort of models basically that we can explore when we start looking at what we call DeFi. This is an increasingly interesting area basically for people sort of who aren't in fintechs. But in addition to that, when we start having a look at the involvement of decentralized finance and the Internet of Things, what if I could get your fridge to make you rich? So I'll run through a scenario. So when you have a look at the Internet of Things, you can put the Internet of Things onto the blockchain. I can create a smart fridge. Every time you run out of milk, the fridge can say to you, right, you normally pay €1 for your milk. I've actually created a buying consortium with another 1 million fridges who also ran out of milk. And we've managed to negotiate a better contract, and we can get that milk for 80 cents. I've got 20 cents left over. What would you like me to do with that? Do you just want to save it, or do you want to put it into an investment vehicle? Now, in the UK, basically, that kind of market is worth about £362 billion. So imagine your fridge making your money, because it can just take any money that it saves from being part of a buying consortium, and it puts it into a bank account for you. It then does whatever it does with it. Your fridge in the future can make you rich, and it can disrupt the banks. Now, from a government perspective, we've got central bank digital currencies. Now, a central bank digital currency like a digital euro would actually allow any government, basically within the Eurozone, to analyze in real time their economies. So at the granular level, you can figure out basically what everyone is spending and what they're spending it on. And you can adjust your monetary policies in real time. Because say, for example, you see that people in Lisbon have stopped buying coffee. And you think that from an economic perspective, that's a little bit of an issue. You could all of a sudden promote a tax-free day for coffee purchases to try to boost that part of the economy. But you can do that in almost real time because you've got the tools. So CBDCs basically are really interesting. They come with challenges, but they're actually very interesting. E-countries, as we start digitizing the planet, if you have a look at Facebook, Facebook is really a virtual nation of 2.8 billion people. Now, when you have a look at Portugal, Portugal has around 11 million citizens. Now, when you consider basically improving the productivity of those citizens to try to boost Portuguese GDP, you're kind of going to end up with a cap at some point. It's going to be a little bit difficult to really try to, say, for example, overtake the United States. However, when you have a look at countries like Estonia, for example, as well as others, you can become an e-country. You can offer e-citizenships, basically where you could be an e-citizen of Portugal, and Portugal will give you particular benefits for being an e-citizen. But as in return for being an e-citizen, you need to contribute to the Portuguese economy. So this is sort of another interesting concept. And then, of course, when we start having a look at government, we all know about the bureaucracy, the many, many, many layers of discussions and conversations that have to go on before we start shifting the dial. Over in China, one of the politicians in the foreign ministry is actually an artificial intelligence. It's being used to negotiate Belt and Road initiatives. That's it. And it's actually doing very well. So artificial intelligent politicians, already here. Now, healthcare. Now, in 2028, we're going to reach something called escape velocity. Now, what we mean by escape velocity is that in 2028, it is estimated that new healthcare technologies will add over a year's worth of extra life to people for every actual year. Which means that from 2028, the average lifespan starts increasing from about 85, depending on the country you live in, to 100, 120, 150. And really by about 2040, we should start seeing 100 becoming the new 60. That has implications basically on pretty much every aspect of society. When we start having a look at the ability to 3D print human organs, we've already managed to 3D print a miniature beating human heart. But we've also been able to 3D print a beating heart with embedded electronics. So as again, we start looking into the future of healthcare, not just the near future, because this is here now, but the further future. What happens basically when I say to you, you can have a 3D printed regular human heart or a 3D printed hybrid heart. And the benefit of the hybrid heart is if it detects any arrhythmias, it will just kickstart itself again. So if you have a heart attack, it'll just kickstart you again. For example, it'll apply an electric current. So when we have a look at organs on demand, these are already being used throughout, for example, in the UK NHS, throughout Israel, things like bones, skin, corneas, all those kinds of things. And this is thanks to one type of technology called 3D bioprinting. In vivo gene editing, thanks to technologies like CRISPR, we can put you onto an intravenous drip, and if you have an inherited genetic disease, we can clip out the bad gene, clip in the good gene, and you no longer have the inherited genetic disease. And the only inconvenience you've had to suffer is having a cup of tea for half an hour in a hospital bed. We did that about a year ago over in the US with a Hunter's syndrome patient. So these are incredibly powerful technologies, but again, we need to consider the ethics and the regulatory environment basically associated with these. And technology is way ahead of regulators, as most of us already know. When we have a look at decentralizing healthcare, primary and secondary healthcare, increasingly, the phones in our pockets basically are tricorders. If I use artificial intelligence and I use the cameras and the sensors and the microphone, if I use artificial intelligence and the microphone and I talk into my phone, it can tell me whether or not I'm ill, whether I have the onset of PTSD, dementia, ADHD, all these kinds of things. In addition to that, if I use the camera and it just looks at my face, it can tell me whether or not I have pancreatic cancer. It can tell me whether I have skin cancer. Thanks to the way that I talk, basically it can also tell me if I'm at risk of having a heart attack. Yeah, this is kind of university level stuff as well. You know, we're not talking about huge multinationals spending billions of dollars to build these new innovations. Yeah, we're talking about a couple of $100 and some university students. But these technologies increasingly decentralize healthcare. Think telehealth or telepsychiatry on steroids. Media. Now, we started talking about decentralized finance. I told you everything was linked. Now, in Fortnite is a game. There are 200 million players on the platform at the moment. It was a big hit during lockdown, but there are lots and lots of microtransactions that take place on Fortnite. So if you're a bank, you're having a look at your new competition being the fintechs. You're not having a look at Fortnite as being your future competition. And yet Fortnite generates almost 80% of all of its multi-billion-dollar revenues from microtransactions. If they came out with a credit card, or if they came out with a savings scheme, or whatever it happens to be, they have 200 million people that they can tap into, which is actually partly why companies like Sony and others basically are actually investing in them. So when we talk about financial services not being a game, it absolutely is a game, but this will disrupt you, potentially. The metaverse, basically when we have a look at media, if you take blockchain, increasingly we have this concept of the metaverse, basically where we can take one character from, say for example, Roblox, and we can port that character into Minecraft or Fortnite. So what happens basically when we build the metaverse and you can have a digital avatar or character that jumps between universes? There's an opportunity there. Synthetic media, you know, if you consider 7 years ago, this was impossible. 5 years ago, if you wanted to do this, you'd need a team of Stanford experts and AI scientists who are all paid about $1.5 million a piece. 3 years ago, you need a small team. 1 year ago, you could download an app and sort of do this at a basic level. Let me introduce you to Tom Cruise. Hey, Tom.
What's up, TikTok? You guys cool if I play some sports? I love it. More for the audio experience. As much as the momentum. Hey, listen up, sports and TikTok fans. If you like what you're seeing, just wait till what's coming next. That's why. Oh. It's Okay, TikTok. Impression time. This is a 5-second impression of a snapping turtle coming out of its shell. Did it mess up my hair?
No, your hair looks fine.
Nope.
Yeah, I told you. Anyway, thanks, Tom. That's a deep fake. That's it. But increasingly, we are already at the point where we can create deep fakes. Anyone can create deep fakes just using text. This is from Stanford. If you don't have artificial intelligence skills, type what you want, and we have general adversarial networks that will start compiling the videos for you. Synthetic media and synthetic content and deep fakes are way ahead of any place that you think they are at the moment. And then technology, and we're going to round out now. So we have companies basically that scan the dark web to try to predict cyber attacks. Basically, if you can see people downloading particular exploits, mentioning particular company names basically in the forums, then you can go and warn that company. We have semi and fully autonomous robo-hackers. Robo-hackers like Mayhem, which the US Pentagon uses, are fully autonomous and they can identify bugs within your code or exploits within your code that they can either fix or do something with, that they can do it 100 million times faster than a regular human hacker. Are you prepared? And then finally, when we have a look at quantum, because we've got to mention quantum technologies. Yeah, if you have a look at the development of quantum security technologies like quantum key distribution, well, if you want to protect your self-driving hotel room in the future, thanks to companies like SRI, you can use QKD. And QKD is unhackable. Plus, for that, when we start looking ahead at quantum technologies, that's where 6G starts coming in, kind of 2030. And frankly, this is just the tip of the bottom of the iceberg. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I hope it got you thinking. And remember, go and have a holiday. Thank you very much. Goodbye.